What is up, guys? My name is Limes, and this is RoI Talk episode 5. Today we'll be talking about esports and competitive games, and how this all relates back to Rise of Immortals. Now, the first one I want to talk about is kind of the difference between esports and competitive games, because there is quite a big difference, and it's important to know the difference between these two types. A simple definition for both of them is that esports is kind of designed more for the spectator, while competitive games are designed more for the players. Now, I'll go into this a bit more detail. Basically, esports are expensive. They're very, very expensive. You see the huge events, things like DreamHack, IEM, things like that, and they cost a lot of money. You've got huge numbers of people, huge numbers of players, huge number of games, kind of, depending. So the main source of revenue for these kinds of events is easily advertising. There is a little bit of money in sponsorship, but definitely most of the money is in the advertising. Advertising requires viewers, because that's how advertising works. The viewers need to be entertained, so that they continue watching streams or continue watching the event, so that the advertising works. This means that more money needs to be put into the streams, the casters, the event itself for the spectators, so that the people running the event basically get their money back on the advertising. This just creates kind of a vicious cycle with trying to run the event, and at the end of the day, there is kind of little room for the players themselves. Sure, the players are the center focus of the whole event, the whole esport event, but if you kind of look at the grand scheme, everything, the whole event, there is a very little part of the event actually dedicated to the games themselves. If you look at competitive games, on the other hand, competitive games are wholly designed for the players. It's just basically in the name, it's competitive games. You have things like LAN tournaments, you have things like online tournaments, which are entirely made for the players. And one important thing is that although there are people spectating these matches and watching them either on streams or at events, stuff like that, they are usually players of that game themselves. That's the big distinction which is made between esports and competitive games. With esports, you're reaching out to a very wide audience. There are people who will be watching the streams of the games, watching the events, which don't even play the games there. I know I, for one, watch a lot of StarCraft 2 streams, or tournaments or events and stuff like that, and I don't even play the game. I played a little bit, but I wouldn't call myself a StarCraft 2 player. Why? Because it's kind of designed as an esport. We'll go into StarCraft 2 later, because I think it's a good example. Well, on the other hand, if you have Rise of Immortals, which is wholly a competitive game at the moment, you don't really see that kind of crossover. A lot of the streams are watched by people who play the game, and it's very rare to get other people. So basically, what does this mean? Well, the big thing is that esports needs to be accessible by the viewers, because it needs to attract viewers from pretty much everywhere. The games and the events need to be accessible to the viewers. Now, not only does this take a level on the organization and the event side, it also takes a level in the game side itself. Now, the big thing being that game mechanics that people are watching need to be easy to understand, but still deep enough to have that high level of play for the players. It also needs obvious objectives and reasoning behind everything. This is kind of a big reason why MOBAs have, in particular, taken quite a long while to kind of surface in the esport market, I believe. This is kind of because of some of the advanced mechanisms which come with the game, especially with Dota, with things like denying and kind of the extended laning phase you get in Dota. It's kind of confusing as to the enemy's right there, why don't they just attack them, and why are they killing their own dudes? It's stuff like that which doesn't really help the game as an esport, because people watching it will just be legitimately confused as to what is happening. Now, League of Legends has kind of fixed this a little bit with the removal of denying and kind of the more action-orientated laning phase. That's kind of attributed to how League of Legends has stayed as an esport, rather as how they kind of got to an esport. I don't really want to talk about that now. Moving on, at the moment, Rise of Immortals is definitely a competitive game. It's not an esport, it's nowhere near an esport. Now, this isn't a bad thing necessarily, and although Rise of Immortals easily has the makings of an esport in certain areas, like having a dedicated community, having fairly good balance. It's not amazing, but it's getting there, and it's definitely better than some of the other MOBAs out there at the moment. The big thing is that it doesn't have the money or the outside support to expand into an esport. Now, like I said, this isn't horrible, this isn't bad for the game. It just means that the kind of outside exposure that the game receives is fairly smaller compared to actual esport titles. But having said that, the tournaments that are being run, there are a lot of competitive events that are being run by the community. They're definitely a good step in the right direction towards developing a better competitive game. I don't think we should really be aiming for an esport necessarily. I think that's just way out of our league, and definitely focusing on more of a competitive game, just that kind of focuses more on the players themselves, is definitely the way we want to go. So with that, I actually have some questions I want to ask. The first question is, what do you regard as an esport? So in your eyes, what do you see as defining an esport compared to a just competitive game? Do you think Rise of Immortals could ever make it as an esport, and how do you think this would happen? And lastly, do you watch or follow any esport events, and what games do you generally watch when you watch these events? Put your answers in either the comments below or the forum thread, which I'll put up and I'll put a link to in the description below. And that is it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. My name is Limes, and I'll see you next time.